un poco más de tiempo, ¿verdad? Tratando de reconstruir, salvar lo que pudimos, lo que entre todo, ¿verdad? Hay cosas materiales, las cosas materiales van y vienen, pero las cosas personales, el trabajo de nosotros se perdió, el trabajo como profesores, mi biblioteca estaba destruida, tuve que volver a construir.
But I think that healing is a process. And if you're in the midst of healing, you need to be patient with yourself. Be patient with yourself. Love yourself. Let love and support come in. You don't have to do it all by yourself. I think that's the key. There's so many loving women that can support you on your path.
In 1968, it was kind of difficult for women to play. Nobody wanted to play with women. Everybody thought women shouldn't play. And this has persisted up until, I would say, into the late 80s, 90s. Well, it's been kind of a hard, long road with that. It's a lot better now. But when I got back, I got all kinds of people calling me and asking me, what do you think you're doing? How dare you? I got a death threat. I was going to be murdered if I ever taught any other women to play, et cetera, et cetera.
Good evening. My name is Salinas, and I'm the programs coordinator here at Beyond Baroque. I'd like to welcome you to the space. We're a nonprofit literary arts organization founded in 1968 by George Story Smith. The organization first began as an experimental literary magazine and later evolved into the interdisciplinary art space we know today. First having a small front just a few blocks away in Abbot Kinney till 1978, when the organization took residence here in the original Venice City Hall building. I'd like to acknowledge our presence on the ancestral and unceded territory of the Tongva peoples. Venice is the original home of the Wonka and Sangha Tongva villages. We acknowledge the wrong done to indigenous peoples through colonialism and genocidal practices. As an arts organization, we're committed to uplifting their communities, stories, and cultures. If you've been a supporter of our space here at Beyond Baroque, on behalf of the whole team, Quentin, our directors, Quentin, Jimmy, our tech crew, and even our bookstore staff, thank you so much. And if it is your first time here, welcome. We're committed to amplifying the voices of local and international authors through our programming and workshops that we host week to week. You can find all of this info on our website, and as well as the programs that we have in the coming month. We are taking a little bit of a short break in August, but you'll find us back in the space in September. And we have a few exciting programs lined up for to celebrate Latinx Heritage Month. So please support the space, support our authors. We have copies of their books right across the hall in our bookstore. You can purchase copies there and also inquire about becoming a member. That will support directly all our efforts to continue having free programming here in the space. Tonight we present Celebrating Women of Resilience, a photographic tribute to the artist. A big shout out and thank you to the Latina Writers Conference team for allowing Beyond Baroque to serve as a first venue. And for all the work done to put together this series of programs and make space for Latina writers across Los Angeles. Some of the organizers are with us tonight. So before we introduce the MC of the evening, please welcome Luis Resto, who will say a few words about the Latina Writers Conference. Yeah.
Good evening, buenas tardes, buenas noches, disculpa. So yes, I'm one-fifth of the organizing team of the Latina Writers Conference. We are on day 6. So we started on Sunday in Whittier and in Highland Park, and we're here today in Venice. Tomorrow we're super excited. We have 2 more events tomorrow. We have one with Loxa, and then we have one in El Monte. So we're going to highlight the teenagers in the afternoon, and then in the evening we're going to get a little scary, and we're going to highlight and talk with some Gothic literature, horror. So it's going to be super awesome in El Monte. And then on Sunday we're going to close everything off at La Plaza de la Raza from 3 to 8, and we'll have some more round tables. We'll have chulita vinyl. We'll have some food. We'll have some wine. We'll have a comedian. We'll be presenting the Maestra Award to Saba Rafael Garcia, who, as many of you know, out in Santa Ana with Libro Mobile. She's done some amazing work there. So it's almost over, right? But not just yet. We have tonight, and I really want to thank you so much, Claudia. The book is amazing, and we cannot wait for today's panel discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Really quick, I forgot to say something.
Go ahead.
Sorry, no problem. I also want to shout out the fact that we have some T-shirts out in the lobby. Sorry, like shameless plug, right? Shameless plug, real quick. Sorry, before Claudia becomes, just emanates her brilliance and everybody else. So shameless plug. We have some T-shirts for sale as well as totes. Please go ahead and check them out. We also have a survey that we're asking people to fill out so that we can keep doing this, right, in the near future, not anytime soon because we're tired, but pronto, right? Like give us at least 2 years, right? But so please fill out the survey to let us know what works, what you would like to see more of. We can't do anything about the weather, so sorry about that. So back to you, Claudia.
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here tonight. I would like to express my sincere appreciation to the board members of the Latina Writers Conference for generously providing the grant that facilitated this panel. So when I call your name, please stand up if you're here. Thank you, Tomás Benítez. I don't think he's here. Xochitl Yulisa Bermejo. Jessica Ceballos y Campbell. She's outside. Rebecca Alvarez, right there. Nevares. Oh, Nevares. I'm so sorry. And Luibet Resto over here. Thank you so much. Moreover, I extend my heartfelt gratitude to Beyond Baroque for providing us a safe space to share our stories. Okay? So before we begin, it's supposed to be 5 of us. Leticia Hernández-Linares couldn't make it today because her flight got delayed, but she recorded herself talking about her story of resilience and reading 2 poems, and she's great. She's fabulous. You're gonna love her. So let me begin. So it is my pleasure to be the host of this remarkable panel comprised of storytellers, poets, artivists, professors, and writers. We are here to tell stories of resilience that persistently shapes the lives of women. These timeless stories persistently resound in our present day reality. But here we are, not just surviving, we are successful in our own respective fields. We are writing, we are creating art. We're here to embrace diversity and celebrate the achievements of women of color, but most importantly, we're here to be vulnerable and to share stories. Tonight, I would like to share with you the journey of the Today's Revolutionary Women of Color project, which began 12 years ago. And it birthed this photography anthology titled Women, Mujeres y Shock, Revolutionary Visions. This book is the outcome of a photo and video oral history which shares the creativity of women artists whose writings, paintings, and careers carry a theme of social justice. I want to begin by sharing what motivated me to embark on this journey. So here's my story of resilience. I'm not going to share my immigration story to this country. That's another book. This is the other book. Okay, it's called Meeting the Fog. The story I want to share will resonate with many of you here tonight. You may not be able to tell from here, but I'm a strong and resilient woman who knows how to pursue her desires in life. However, like many of us, once upon a time I fell in love with the wrong person. And he was a poeta maldito who shattered me like no one else before, not even my own mother. It was during this time that I realized I needed to take action to save myself from this man who had complete control of my life. And so I turned to art as my weapon of choice. As a photographer and writer, I pondered over how I could use these 2 gifts. That's when I reached out to a friend who happened to be a poet, and she decided to tell me to photograph strong women with stories of resilience. She suggested creating a book, which is here, 6 years later, a photography book showcasing these stories of strength. Furthermore, she recommended some women I could interview. And so with a broken spirit, yet unwavering determination, I embarked on this journey seeking solace through these incredible women. So in the first week of October 2012, I met with 10 women from LA and San Francisco. I photographed them and sat down to listen to their stories. Some interviews were short, lasting half an hour to an hour, while others extended for 2 hours or more. We went on a date, a whole day date. Determined to capture their narratives faithfully, I recorded these interviews, which can be now found on today's Revolutionary Women of Color website or on my YouTube channel. As I sat with these women, I realized that what I had endured was not as devastating as what they had experienced throughout their lives. This realization empowered me, and I found the strength to break away from the poet and end the cycle of domestic violence. In return, I gained the friendship of 50 women who I interviewed over the course of 6 years across the United States. These women became a true source of healing for my soul and mind. In 2017, Conocimientos Press published Women, Mujeres y Shock, Revolutionary Women. Within its pages, you will find the stories of resilience shared by 40 remarkable women alongside their portraits. This book was honored with the International Latino Book Award in 2019. Throughout the course of this conversation, we will delve into how I met these remarkable individuals and the inspiring stories of resilience they carry within them. To conclude our panel discussion, each of them will have the opportunity to share their voice with us for 5 minutes. They will read excerpts from their latest books or projects, giving us a glimpse into their ongoing artistic endeavors. And at the end, we're gonna have a Q&A, and we will sign books if necessary. So ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, allow me to introduce you to these extraordinary women of color who have graced us with their presence tonight. But don't be afraid, we're gonna have a conversation. So let me start. Can you hear me? There's mics over there. Oh, can I help? Okay.
No, which one's closer to you? So
let's start with Margaret Garcia. Margaret Garcia. She is identified as one of 24 women artists who have had an impact on LA art, currently on display at the Cheech Marin Center for Chicano Art and Culture of the Riverside Art Museum in the Universal City Metro Station. So let's welcome Margaret Garcia. When I met Margaret Garcia, I met her when I met Josie Méndez-Negrete as well. I got invited by a friend of mine who passed away, Sal Valdez, an activist, amazing human being. He invited me to meet Josie at this restaurant. And I said, sure, if you want me to interview this woman because you say she's amazing, I will give it a chance and let me go meet her. So when I showed up to the restaurant, it was Josie and her husband, Jorge Negrete. It was Margaret, it was Marta and Sal, que en paz descanse. And they were all sitting on a booth, all 5 of them, just chatting away about activism in the 1960s and all the people that they knew. And I arrived and they looked at me. I was 10 years younger, so. They just looked at me and said, have a seat with us. So they pulled a chair for me and I sat there listening to their stories. And I was mesmerized with Margaret and I was mesmerized with Josie. That's how I met them. And with Margaret, she invited us to her studio to go check out her artwork. It was impressive, beautiful, and powerful. And this is where I interviewed them, just like the way you see those videos in the background. I interviewed them and I recorded them with my iPad. That's what I was using at the time. And I remember, Margaret, your story was about you kidnapping your own child. You want to talk about that?
No.
What do you want to talk about?
I want to talk about my grandmother.
Oh, let's do that.
Okay.
Go for it.
Can I read the passage from my catalog?
Sure. You're going to have time to do that later.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So right now it's the stories of resilience.
Well, my grandmother was born in El Paso, and she was the eldest of 24 children. She was raped by my grandfather at the age of 13. He was 30, and they forced her to marry him because he had taken her virginity. And you know how Catholic families were back then. Once you lost your virginity, you lost your value. And that was the way it was looked at. So she decided, she was forced to marry him. She was pregnant with her fourth, and she fell at, actually it was in Lincoln Park where she fell down and miscarried that child. There was an argument, and because of that, he left her with the 3 children and no means of support. So she took up with a widower. So after 6 months, he came back. He said, I want my wife, I want my kids. And she said, chale, I don't want to have anything to do with you. And my great-grandmother convinced her to let him have the kids overnight. And it was during that period of time, they were all deported to Mexico. So my father was a toddler when this happened, and so she didn't see her child or them until she found my father, I think when he was 15. And she went through a lot to look for her children. And that's how my father's story starts. And I was born to him and my mother, who came here as an undocumented worker. And so I often say my mother was undocumented and I was conceived out of wedlock. So my first breath was a criminal act. So that's kind of the way I look at it. But it is my grandmother, more than anybody else, that taught me and gave me my sense of worth and my sense of belonging. And yeah.
Your strength more than anything. Thank you for sharing that, Margaret. Did something happen with your grandmother? And besides that?
Well, I was her first grandchild, so for her it was, I think, and I understand this now that I am a mother and a grandmother. Having a grandchild is this opportunity to redo it and do it right, because you've learned so much and you know so much more and you value life in a way that only comes through that experience and through that inheritance. And so, Grandma's no longer with me, neither is my father or my mother. But the thing is that it is learning the value of that relationship to your child and your grandchild.
From what I remember when I first interviewed you, I remember you mentioning something about your grandmother kidnapping her own children.
No, my grandfather.
Your grandfather. Okay.
And he's the one that ended up deported. But he wasn't the only one deported. My uncle and his 4 sisters were also, and you have to understand that their mothers were born here in the United States. He was born in the United States, and yet the entire family was loaded onto a cattle car, an open cattle car in the rain, and then shipped all the way down to Mexico without food or anything, shivering in the rain with no shelter. That's the way they deported the Mexicans on those cattle cars.
Can we talk about your Chicano art community? You're amazing. Your artwork is everywhere right now. It's really impressive. Can we talk about that?
Yes. I just unveiled a mural at Norwalk at the Ultimate Medical Center. It's PACE Center for Seniors. And it's a 20-foot mural, and it is called Psalm 23, which was the last prayer that I said at my mother's bedside when she passed away. And I'm in the Cheech exhibit right now. This is the second exhibit that he has for the permanent collection. And my exhibit with Plaza de Cultura y Arte just came down. This book is from my exhibit at Ventura, and the exhibit that came to La Plaza, they're also producing another book, so there'll be a second book in the making.
I got to see you at Cheech Mahin's and at Plaza de Cultura y Arte. That's right. I got to see you. Thank you, Margaret.
And I teach at Plaza de la Raza, as well as Plaza de Cultura y Arte, and there's actually a gala for Beyond Baroque in which my work is being donated, so you can buy it at the auction.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Margaret. Okay, so now your turn, Felicia. Let me read your bio. Felicia Fe Montes, MA, MFA, Master of Fine Arts, is a Chicana indigenous holistic artivist, FemC, poet, and professor from East Los Angeles. She is the co-founder and coordinator of Mujeres de Maíz and is known throughout the Southwest as an established Chicana cultural worker of a new generation. Let's give her a hand. Felicia, I tend to do a lot of outdoor activities, and I remember in 2016, I think, the Ciclavia was going on, and I had already interviewed you, and I saw you with this beautiful indigenous dress, and you were on a bike with a boombox, and I think behind the bike you had a cart. And now I want you to talk about that right now. What is that holistic cart about? And then we're going to talk about Mujeres de Maíz too.
So what you saw that day was me amplified and reconnecting, reclaiming, remembering my cultura, my indigenous ancestry, honoring the land, the Tongva land, but also my ancestral lands, which El Paso, Texas, is where my ombligo lies, where my belly button umbilical cord is, and my ancestral lands of my family, which is Chihuahua. And the indigenous nation tribe that many people know is Tarahumara, but we call ourselves Raramuri. And so that was me wearing my clothing to represent and to honor, but also offering poetry, offering canto, floricanto, flower and song, and Xochilincuicat, which is the term in Nahuatl, another language, an indigenous language from the 62 plus indigenous languages just in Mexico and indigenous communities. And sharing poetry, also passing over the mic to anybody who wanted to chant or to say things to protest about or to speak about. And I had brought that bike, what I called the bumping BC, because it had also the microphone and a speaker. So I could share my poetry, my hip hop and flowetry, or just amplify somebody else's comments or things that they wanted to share. Also that day I had the Politricked Public Art Cart, which has the P's of public art of poetry, performance, art, poesia, and projections. Although it was in the day, so we didn't do many projections or do any projections that day, but it's fashioned after the elote carts of our community, the corn carts, but instead it offers silkscreen posters, an LCD, a TV monitor where you can share documentaries wherever you go along the cart, information and flyers or know your rights cards for immigration rights and community spaces, and often can project and have other things. So that cart has been in a lot of different spaces now, but the intent is supposed to be in the streets, but it keeps getting invited to museums and festivals And we were just at the Smithsonian Folklife Festival last month.
Beautiful work, Felicia. I am so impressed by you. And you are the founder of Mujeres de Maíz. Tell us about that. That's been going on for 25 years now?
26 now.
26.
Yeah. Co-founder. In La Quech, which is a Chicana spoken word and poetry group, which actually probably has performed here or next door 26 or 10 or 15 years ago with the different manifestations and manifestations of our community, is the founding group of Mujeres de Maíz. And La Quech was just a few women coming together like this. Most of us were in college at UCLA or Cal State LA and shared our poesía. We had a book just like this, all of us, but nobody called themselves a writer. A lot of us were also drawing or creating in there, but nobody called themselves an artist at that time, 26 years ago or 27, 8, right? But we came together and realized the power of poetry, the power of sharing our word with each other. And I kind of get, emotional even thinking about it because some of us were just women wanting to share and see ourselves right now. We said, oh, you're beautiful. No, you're beautiful. We were talking about in La Quech and reflections of each other. And that's what we saw. Literally, our hearts were, sharing a few palabras from this, something that nobody had ever seen, and that we weren't writers or poets, but we shared it, and somebody connected, and the other person connected. And we were asked to share. We're supposed to just share one time in La Quech, and we've been sharing 26 years since then. And when we saw that importance of just one person in the audience, even if it's just that one, somebody feels something, connects with you, comes up after and says, I've been through that, or I've never seen a brown woman or somebody from East LA or somebody with like a Chicana cackle or a Chicana accent or whatever do poetry. Like, I've never seen that. Oh my gosh, tell me more. Where can I find more of you? And the Latina Writers Conference, all right? But when we had that 26 years ago, we kept getting that. We still keep getting that, right? And so we decided to call all our friends at that time, pagers and text, no, maybe not text, but paging, and called and told people, I know you sing, I know you write, I know you draw, I know you paint. We called our elders, like the veteranas, like Linda Vallejo and others, and invited people to share and published a zine, Mujeres de Maíz, in 1997. And we also created a multimedia live art show with poetry, art, dance, music, videos, film, and an exhibition and the zine. And so we've been doing that 26 years now. Usually it's seasonal, but it's mainly an art and wellness organization now, and nonprofit. And so we're continuing to do the work. It is many other women. I'm just one right here amongst these amazing mujeres right here, but there's many others, including Michelle Lopez here and a few others of different generations representing through Mujeres de Maíz, which means Women of the Corn.
Wow, what an incredible accomplishment. I'm honored to know you. Felicia, when we spoke maybe like 8 or 10 years ago when we did your interview, we met at Self-Help Graphics. Do you remember? And I remember you talking about making your own path because your parents are both activists and you needed to find your own name. How's it going?
Going well amongst everybody in our community, right? And amongst the sisterhood of writers and artists and wellness practitioners and spirit sisters of ceremony. My parents were born I was born into the Chicana movement. My parents my dad being a brown beret, and my mom, yeah, exactly, and my mom writing for La Vida Nueva newspaper and creating and sharing. And so born into activism and literally being born under a different name because of the political organizing they did and because the crackdown of the CIA and FBI against civil rights movements at the time of the 60s and 70s. It was myself always trying to find my own way, but also my own identity. Even though I knew I was, like I have a poem that says I'm a Chicana feminist since birth, right? But what did that mean? I might have been strong and known who I identified as Chicana, but what was my own identity other than that? What were my paths? What were my passions? And what was going to be my journey? And so Mujeres de Maíz has really been that, the art and wellness component, which my parents, took me to self-help graphics from very young and those type of cultural spaces. So I had to eventually, be able to find my own way and connect back to my spiritual homeland of our ancestral homelands of Chihuahua, but also honor them mainly through the song, dance, and traditions and rituals that I do, both through poetry and floricanto, but also elsewhere in ceremony and other spaces. And I try to bring to the heart and spirit of Mujeres de Maíz.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. Let's give Felicia my Josie Méndez-Negrete, PhD, an esteemed professor emerita in Mexican American Studies at UTSA, is an accomplished author and editor. Her publications include Las Hijas de Juan, Daughters Betrayed, A Life on Hold, Living with Schizophrenia, an activist, Leaders of San Jose, California, en sus propias voces. She's also a publisher and editor of Conocimientos Press, known for unearthing hidden stories of raza. Her latest work, Rooted in Clay, El Arte de Verónica Castillo, was published in 2023. Let's give her a hand. This woman is in my heart. She calls me very often, and every time she calls me, she says that I'm the most beautiful, the most intelligent, the most creative. She knows how to lift me up every time I talk to her. She's amazing. But I want to talk about Las Hijas de Juan, Josie. Las Hijas de Juan, it's a memoir about your family, about what your struggles and everything that you experienced as a child with your family, especially your sisters. Can we talk about that?
Absolutely. And I'd like to request that the brother keep his thinking to himself, because it's disruptive and it gets in the way of what it is that we're trying to speak. Please honor the space and keep your thoughts to yourself. You have a chance to speak. Thank you.
So let's talk about Las Hijas de Juan. Let's talk about what the story is about, and then how you came about to write the book, your story.
I have been a writer ever since I can remember, without giving it the endowment in meaning that is given to people that love the word. I have written poetry, I have written short stories, and I have documented the life experience of my family in different ways. I grew up in an immigrant family of a father who came in here initially as bracero, and of a mother who left us to come and join my husband in the work that he was doing, which was basically agricultural work in South Texas. So Las Hijas de Juan is about a tragic family where the three oldest daughters end up being incested or raped by the patriarch. I did not speak to anybody ever about it. My sisters and I, excuse me, can you remove him? This is America.
I said thank you, speak to No, I said thank you. Good night. Speak to America. Come on. Don't touch me. I said thank you, speak to America.
You know, I understand.
I said thank you, speak to America. Are you touching?
Okay, let's keep trying to do this, okay? I'm trying to work with you and to understand.
I said thank you, speak to America. I know we're dealing with some mental illness, so I think we can take
listen, I wrote a book that's out there if you want to see it.
We'll just take a quick break. Don't touch me. I said thank you, speak to America. Not at all. I'm right here. No reason at all. The program didn't go on. No.
It's really difficult to be sitting here in the front of the room speaking about the trauma that I've survived and that I'm trying to document for others to understand.
Excuse me, sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. I did nothing wrong. What are you touching my stuff? I'm just a goddamn diarrhea. Leave. I agree with you. I have to leave. I did nothing wrong.
Okay. Good night.
Form can pause. I did nothing wrong.
Correct.
I'm here. You don't have to ask me to leave. No reason at all. Don't touch me. But I'm hanging at home. Home, bro. My kid this way. I did nothing wrong.
You have no idea how difficult it is to not only have to speak about the internalization of domestic violence, sexualization, and by the luck of age, I was almost 10 years old when my mother and my father reunited with the two of us who were left behind in Mexico. And so it's hard to do that while I'm listening to a man who's obviously displaying active mental illness. I have a son who's schizophrenic. I recognized it, and honoring and respecting him, I requested that he refrain from doing what he was doing. And I know sometimes it's impossible, but it's difficult to speak with the distractions that we're experiencing. I asked the Creator for support, and I ask you guys to bear with me. I started writing stories about what it was to grow up in my family when I was a young girl. I kept journals, and I talked to my journal because I couldn't speak to anybody else. If you know the structure or the system of abuse, there's a structure that's embedded in patriarchy, where the king and the controller of the environment is the patriarch of the household.
Lock the door, please. Sorry, you might go back and go look at it. Did somebody lock that door?
You know, if he comes back and he tries to he tries to work with the voices so he can listen to the group, I'm okay with that. But he's not. So it's not working that way.
Anyways, your story. Your story.
Thanks, Martha. So as the oldest girl in the family, the son that was never born, because my father always wanted a firstborn son, I grew up learning what it meant to be a girl and what it meant to be a girl in the context of the environment. And I was devalued and unappreciated there. But elsewhere, I was recognized for my ability to think and my ability to be creative and to tell stories. And so I decided that that was going to be my venue by which I exposed the evil inside our family and inside society. So my father did not violate me in the way that he violated my two other sisters, because I wasn't of his predilection. If you've read about incest, pedophiles have a target audience when they're going to violate somebody. Primarily it's men, and they look at girls as the target, but they also abuse boys. And in our family, it wasn't boys. He wasn't interested in abusing the boys because they were his treasures. He only wanted to subordinate and abuse and dominate the girls because they were worthless. And so my second sister, the one after me, was impregnated at the age of 12. And it was a mysterious pregnancy because nobody knew. We were kept inside the house as if we lived in a monastery or a nunnery. And we dressed likewise because he didn't want us exposing ourselves. He raped my third sister, whom I called my favorite sister, when she was only the age of 13. And we never spoke about it because what pervades with incest is the idea that to speak is shame and to speak is to expose ourselves to the world. And so rather than talk to each other, we developed coping mechanisms that allowed us to protect one another without saying anything. For example, my father would come drunk and blasted after having spent most of his check after getting paid on Friday. And he'd come in and guess who he'd target? You know, the girls. And generally it was a particular girl. And clued into his games, I would often volunteer because I knew that I would not allow him to touch me inappropriately. I knew that I would remove whatever instrument he had. For example, he used a blanket, he wanted to cover me. And I'd say, no tengo frío, I'm not fucking cold, get the fucking blanket off of me, I don't want you to cover me. And so, I'm a chavalita, okay, I don't think I'm even 10 yet. And I'm teaching my sisters to do the same thing. The other thing that I did was to make sure that we had a bottle of aspirins. And whenever he wanted us to get him a beer, we dumped 10 aspirins into the beer. He was so drunk he had no clue that he was giving aspirins. We could have killed him. And I would have liked to have done that at one time. But he would fall asleep. And so we use strategies like that to stay sane. My mother was the worst battered victim. And people often say, well, where was she? Why wasn't she protecting you? She could barely stay alive because if some of us rebelled or if we protested or if we did something to protect the other, he'd beat the crap out of my mother and leave her like Jesus Christ bleeding with her head and her nose. And it's not easy to talk about this, but you know what? We have to. You can hear it in my voice, you can hear it in my body. I carry those stories inside myself, but they're stories that had to be told. And so Las Hijas de Juan came about that way. There's much more to tell, but I'm going to stop there in case you have a follow-up.
Josie. I admire your strength, and I'm so sorry for what you experienced as a child. Nobody deserves that. But look at you. You're so strong. You're so determined. You have accomplished so many wonderful things in life. And you wrote another book about your son too, who has schizophrenia. Your stories are so important to the world. So thank you for writing. Thank you, Josie.
The thing about it is that my task to expose the evil in the world, because that's how I see it, was not something that was supported by academia. As a matter of fact, when my Hijas de Juan book came out, it had a lot of distribution. And the president of the university where I worked fired the community relations director because she did a blurb on my book and she encouraged and urged everybody to go buy it. She got fired. Okay, this was a Chicano, okay, who did that. I will not soil my tongue by giving you his name, but
and
look
recent.
it up.
I mean, within the last 10 years, within the last, it's not in history. It was recent that happened.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
So again, life is not easy, but I think that life is to be lived and to do the best we can with what we have so that we can create a better environment for the people that come behind us. And I'm really honored to have been asked by my son Tito Lopez Jr. to write A Life on Hold. He read Las Hijas de Juan. And when he read Las Hijas de Juan, he opened up. He was already diagnosed mentally ill. It took 3 years to get him to be seen by a psychiatrist, to be put on medication, to be evaluated, because he hadn't had 2 hospitalizations, and he needed 2 hospitalizations to get diagnosed. I'm sure this man needs that kind of help, and I'm sure that he doesn't want to take the medication because he doesn't want to be numbed into stupidity. That's what happens with mental illness. Unless we have invested parents who understand that there's no shame, that some of us are born that way, and all of us have the propensity in the fourth chromosome of our strand to be mentally ill. Things have to happen in our environment, in our life, that allow us, or that basically unbind that fourth chromosome, and we become mentally ill. Okay? It can be bipolar disorder, it can be schizophrenia, paranoid schizophrenia, it can be undifferentiated, it could be clinical depression. So all of us have that propensity, but it doesn't happen unless some things take place in your life, and they're associated with trauma. My son was sexually violated at the age of 5 by the babysitter's daughter and her boyfriend. And I had no clue. Here I am trying to end the cycle. Here I am trying to teach other people. And he never told me until he was diagnosed with schizophrenia. And I'm going to tell you, the daycare providers are leaders in the community. They're beloved by the community. They're really good people. But in their own backyard, there was a monster. And that was the father of Estela, the mother of the girl who was sexually abused by him since she was a little girl, along with the second sister. I had no clue. I didn't know about the grandfather. Had I met him, had I heard stories about him, I might have been able to see the grooming and to see the kind of work that he did to violate his 2 granddaughters. And the trick that they used with Robert was to tell him that they were teaching him how to be a husband when he grew up and he got married. That comes from religious argumentation. I don't know if that's what the grandfather used to violate them. And so there's so much to tell. So my attempt here is to show you Las Hijas de Juan was exposing the way that the privacy of the home harms and hurts the most children in society today. It's not COVID. The greatest pandemic worldwide is incest and violation of boy and girl children in the house and by those that have a relationship with the patriarchs of that home and the matriarch of that home. So there's so much to say. I'm going to stop myself to see if you have a follow-up.
Thank you, Josie. We're going to stop here. Let's give a hand to Josie. Thank you for sharing that important information. Up next is going to be Leticia Hernández-Linares. Like I mentioned earlier, she couldn't be here before because her plane got delayed, but she recorded herself talking about her story of resilience and reading 2 poems. So this is Leticia Hernández-Linares. She's an award-winning interdisciplinary bilingual writer, artist, and racial justice educator. She is the author of Mucha Muchacha, Too Much Girl, and Alejandría Fights Back, La Lucha de Alejandría. Widely published, she has presented her work internationally and teaches ethnic studies at San Francisco State University. So I just want to mention something quickly about Leticia before they play her video. When I met Leticia, she lives in the Mission in San Francisco, and I remember she invited me to her home, and her home is beautiful. We went to the rooftop, and that's where I took her photographs, and I videotaped her for her interview. And now, 10, almost 11 years later, her story deals with displacement, deals with gentrification, deals with being... she's going to explain more about the topic. So let's give Leticia Hernández-Linares a hand.
Greetings from the unceded land of the Raimito Sholoni, aquí en La Misión, en la vecindad. I wasn't supposed to be here. I was supposed to be in person with you in Los Angeles. And, Alaska Airlines and SFO was not on the same page with me. And there were a lot of people with me at the airport for hours, very upset because they were on the way to the Taylor Swift concert. Let's just not talk about it. Anyway, the universe did not see its way for us to be together in person, but I'm grateful to share a few words on this humble video. I know it won't be super fancy, pero bueno, está bien. Gracias to the organizers of the Latina Writers Conference, to Beyond Baroque. Apologies and so much love to my fellow panelists. I was so looking forward to talking with you and seeing you. And thank you to the audience, and especially to Claudia, querida Claudia, and this wonderful project that I'm so honored to be a part of, to support, and to celebrate. I last saw you, I think the last time I saw you was when I was just kind of reeling from having narrowly avoided being evicted from the longest place I've ever called home. I've lived here on the same block for almost 30 years, and I was in the midst of doing an interdisciplinary project, documenting and writing poetry and doing some street performance around disappearing community hubs as, you know, the force of gentrification and displacement was ramping up about 10 or so years ago. Not that it started then, but, and then I received a very unexpected and terrifying eviction notice, and I couldn't answer my middle school at the time son's questions about where we would live or where he would go to school, and it was a really difficult experience. But that doesn't make me special. A lot of people have gone through it, are going through it, will continue to have to deal with it with less resources and community that I am blessed to have, and that really was the saving force, the saving grace. Resources, legal assistance, community rallying, creative outpours, all those things helped us navigate. And I'm always thinking about, what do people with less resources or less education, like, how are they faring? How do they figure this out? And I'm happy to sit down and have a coffee or un trago with someone in person and lay out the details, but I'm not going to spell them out here because we got to be vigilant. We can't let the greed mongers, the developers, the owners get wind of how it is we resist and we survive. But one of the blessings that came out of this was an awareness of my son's awareness of this issue and of how precious this place is and how lucky they are to have been born here and live here and be part of the community and grow up in this community. And something that my younger son did at around 9 years old inspired the children's book that I wrote, La Lucha de Alejandría, Alejandría Fights Back. So I've been working on continuing to write about this issue and or create art around it in multiple ways. And this was a particularly special project because it was part of a national collaborative Rise Home Stories project, which had various narrative platforms connected to it, and also resources listed wherever you are in the country if you're dealing with issues of housing rights and land justice, that you know that you can turn to community for support. And I won't tell you what happens in the book because you have to buy it and read it and find out. I don't want to spoil it. I know there's a lot of suspense. There should be like a really good soundtrack behind me, but I'm not that technologically advanced. Right now, I'm going to pretend I can hear you laughing at my cheesy jokes. So I am working on another book of poetry, Vecina, and it is documenting both those initial poems I was writing about the community intermixed with my own personal experiences, and those that I continue to witness daily, because there's still a lot of departures and shuddering and even fatalities, and it's a daily kind of navigation. But the doom loop is not real. San Francisco is not dead. The mission is still here. We are still resistant and thriving and celebrating and making art and celebrating community. Sorry for that awkward gap, but I told you I'm not a videographer. I'm everything else but that. Just kidding. I'm not everything. Kind of, sort of. Well, anyway, let me get to the poetry. Pinturas futuras. Here's to daydreaming and insisting ourselves into the future and into this place, staying in this place. Pinturas futuros. The ground a drum, the drum a valley, the valley a recreation of the equatorial. Recreation a mural that feeds our equatorial saudade. Our saudade, the lament that builds movements and comedores. Our movements irreverent of borders. our comedores feeding our starving almas. Caving in from the distance, we dig, we pull them open. From the distance, we dig cantos from our pockets, our cantos made of chorus. Paint me a future where you can recognize me on this corner. Paint me bristle to my breast, lather cobalt and fuchsia layers on my sternum that eventually peel and unearth sand crystals I can't wash off my ankles, no matter how I try to dust the glistening of homeland. I arurururu, I bolero, so you can dream us still in Cuscatan, invited on Ramay, living on the 25th Street, present on Valencia, communing on Bryant. Future me into a backdrop of a sutro bath, my braids and brightness outside the perimeter. Mix the colors until you cover the slate in pastel and white from all the palettes. Spill the scaffolds. Beat the developers at their ruthless Jenga. A clatter and cracking of the hastily constructed walls, slippery, foldable, artificial. The bones of wood, the wood a haunting of residents, the residents scattered mapless, maps altered and hidden, our sons. Our sons sprouting like sweet, sunny California poppies, illegal to cut, pluck, uproot from natural habitat. The state's perennial, more protected than our progeny, more protected than our babies. Paint me reeds that I sing into a boat, siren the color, wail the bullets, grow fins and unearth the creek and insist us into the future. Paste us into 4 familiar walls. Chant us back, together, back together again. Arurururu, 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 arurururu. Yeah, how you like them revolving backgrounds? I have a little bit of tech in me. Tech savvy, I should say, not tech as in big capital letters tech. Okay, let me not digress, or it'll be a mess. I didn't mean for that to rhyme, but it worked out anyway. Recently, there was a retrospective of historic screen prints at the Mission Cultural Center with, by masters like Esther Hernández and Calixto Robles, and poets were invited to write about the art, and I chose some carnival prints from past carnival parades made by Nancy Hom, an interdisciplinary artist here in San Francisco. And it's behind me, kind of see it a little bit. All right, I don't want to make you dizzy. It's called Espiritu. It riffs off of the Sergio Méndez song, Magaleña. You know it. Right, kind of, sort of. So there's a refrain there, or a chorus actually, which is you in Portuguese. So I'm kind of playing with that a little bit. And also the piece is called Celebration of the Spirit. So if I were there with you, I would have you sing with me. You can still sing if you want to. Espiritu. The parade explodes with a whistle, with the call of the clave and glitter on the ground, gleaming, sun and fog interwoven, chanting pride of homeland, unveiling a choreography of languages. De, 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 de. Do, 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 do. An ocean current of steps counting out beats with shells, gourds, animal skin. Peregrine and crow entangled, gliding low as if to join the capoeiristas, waving hands, reach up to touch the wet paint on the restored Galvez. Despite revolving storefronts, the neighborhood resolved, and Mixcoat smudges the street signs, while the procession wraps around the huepas and the orales. De, 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 de. Do, 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 do. A murder of crows, a brood of señoras, a single file cruise of glistening hood automotive canvas and the cars, the clubs, a cultivation of the classic. Turns, twirls, and flips across intersections, and Juan Alicia's mission manifesto blossoms. Plume performers adorn in beaded embroidery and brilliant headdresses soaring above our little ones' attentive faces. Hummingbirds buzz in the red bus lane, and everyone tastes the nectar. Gold rings around our eyes, rainbows around shoulders. We sip the tropical nostalgia, summon the spirit of La Selva. with wings outstretched, trenzas ribboned and eyelids painted, arms arching, legs lifting into sharp breezes and anima wind gusts. Our madres, our hijas, secure the nest for our gathering in celebration of the spirit. En celebración del espíritu, en celebración de te, 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 te. Tú, 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 tú. You, 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 you. Don't believe the hype. Don't believe the doom loop. We're still here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Leticia. So now our next part of the panel discussion, we're gonna give each one of the women a chance to read for 5 minutes an excerpt of their latest work, their latest book, or whatever project they're working on, and then we're gonna conclude with the Q&A. Would you like to go first? Sure, let's go.
I first want to thank Josie for sharing what she shared, and in some ways, like when Claudia asked me if I wanted to talk about another incident, and I said no. That's why. And in part for any of us to sit here and share something that is so profoundly revealing and bearing, to have to be able to do that when there's other nonsense going on in the audience is almost impossible. So thank you for doing that. I'm going to skip around because I think I read a little bit about that. I told you my grandmother found my father when he was 15, and she brought him back to this country, and he was just 15 years old. He got beaten up and stripped over at the Pico house during the Zoot Suit riots. I think people remember that. Well, I became Grandma's first child, so I'm going to read a little bit about that. When he returned, Grandma was living with a widower. Wait, excuse me, I'm sorry. More than a decade later, Grandma found the children, and she had put an ad in the Spanish language papers that she had been looking for her children. The day came when my 15-year-old father reunited with Grandma. They began working to mend their relationship. My father was the younger and still in diapers when they were taken from their mother. I was the firstborn grandchild that Grandma would hold on to, and because my cousins remained in Mexico. This put me in the center of Grandma's universe. She was a self-made woman who became a nurse at Los Angeles County General Hospital, where she received her nursing degree through practice, and in the process became a deputized sheriff because she worked in the county jail ward. In addition, she was a midwife, which allowed her to file birth certificates. This is when she became a bit of a coyote. When she helped people get their documents, she'd often go in and say, "I delivered that baby. I just didn't get around to filing those papers." This is how she met my mother. And it was also how she introduced my parents to each other. I was the out-of-wedlock product of my mother, who was undocumented. And this is how I always say, my first breath was a criminal act. My existence from the start was to identify outside of legality. Interestingly, it was my grandmother's medical connections that allowed her to legalize my mother's status. That way, as Grandma told it to me, that it was the story of Lupe, the little girl that she adopted, who had died of tuberculosis in the of the bones in the communicable diseases ward at the county general, whose birth certificate sealed my mother's identity until after I was born. It was Grandma's practice to take me to places with her. By second grade, Grandma would come to the school and tell them that I had a doctor's appointment that had to go with her. From there, we went to downtown and boarded a bus to the Hollywood Park racetrack in Inglewood. We bet on the horses. I learned to pick horses, and she gave me an allowance to choose tickets that would buy me. I'm sorry, I can't read this very easily anymore. The reason she took me to the track, according to her, was that I brought her luck. Every time we went, I won at least $100. However, this was not to my mother's liking. She would get upset, and she was taking me to the track, and she was missing school, but Grandma would call her and promise to buy me a winter coat. Soon my mother would calm down and negotiate for more. But under her breath, I always heard Mother saying, "Libertina, callejera, mujer de la calle." That's what she called Grandma. On one of these excursions, on a very rainy night, we were returning from the track, and we stood at the back of a crowded bus holding the metal poles. An old drunken white man began ranting. There's no seat for him. He stood in the middle of the bus, spewing racial epithets. "I hate niggers. I hate Mexicans." Frightened by the display of hate, I pushed closer to my grandmother, bearing myself in her side. My grandmother lifted up my face with her hands and asked me, "Are you scared?" I nodded, yes. Silently, and my eyes were wide open, she replied, "Don't be, he's just an old drunken fool." My grandmother, who was merely 4'9" tall, turned around and pointed her umbrella at the man, cautioning, "I'm a Mexican, and I'm from Texas. If you don't shut up, I will put my umbrella right through you." The entire busload of people broke into applause. Then I heard someone say, "That's right, and we're going to help her." That's from the back of the bus. Anyway, this was my grandmother. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. Felicia, do you want to go next? Do you want your glasses? No. I might borrow them. Flesh offerings come daily in Chicana ceremonies, as we skin our piernas, pluck our brows, beat our pelo, and tap and pierce our piel. These not so sacred ways becoming reminders, marks of memory, wounds of wisdom, as we come full circle, becoming holy sacrifices within our own temples of worship, becoming the bread and body with our own flesh and blood. Like my scarred sisters, Luis Rodri, and those of the Pelon Nation, I am always running. But I'm still waiting to exhale, respirar profundamente y admirar el sol en mi luna. Crazy curls cover this under construction self. The sign reads, "Woman at work." To remodel this cold casa, una mujer de todos y de nadie. Conocida por todos, pero nadie la conoce. Como Frida, mujer, artista, revolucionaria. Pero hay mucho más adentro de esta mujer de maíz, de un movimiento madre y papa preacher of red rhetoric which she tries to live. Within her sangre, of una línea de mujeres ardientes, valientes, con amor, paz y dignidad. Como the homegirl on the corner, not esperando un vato, un ride. No, she slices vida in quarters, places them in plastic, and adds her own special juices.
She is sweet 16, never time, no feria para una quinceañera. She stands sun-kissed, hair tied back in her fashion 21 gear, sonrisa white platforms to match. Standing in no man's land, she cuts her day in half. Escuela y trabajo. Attempting to cortar the ties of her tío macho and peel off the watching eyes of mothers and manhandling stares of men who pass by, throwing ojos and signs of a language she is just beginning to understand. As the homegirls pass her by on the way to some party, the one she always misses. 'Cause she at the corner cortando cucumbers, en la esquina esperando clientes, at the fruit stand letting them all pass her by. Like that little woman, mujercita of 9 or 10, who today led a marcha with pigtails, smiles, and eyes of hope, all within this young Chicanista soul. See, she reads poem through megaphone, offering it to those inside, listening to daughter's heartbeat through pen and paper, pleading for mommy, who is locked up away from family when that is who she was trying to save. Plucked brows, penciled lips, and scarred truth take megaphone now. This mother organized a prisoner once, now on other side. She uses megaphone to tell her vida. Speak for those seen as living dead. But she had forgotten those days of women, wounded and weeping. The women still weep inside me and you, as 1,000 did before me and continue to do, in no-name cell blocks, tear-stained kitchens, and only sales baños. Lágrimas de sangre cayendo en las calles de Aztlán. Lágrimas de sangre cayendo en la selva de la realidad. Ya no más, lágrimas de sangre en la tierra de Aztlán, Mexicayo, hey, na, hey, ya, hey, yo. Ya no más, lágrimas de sangre. See, I am haunted, but I am not scared. As the spirits guide me, showing me the way of my 4 mothers, mujeres en resistencia, mujeres en existencia, living for those who have come before and those yet to come, from the lifeblood of una mujer, con su luna llena, vida y muerte adentro de mí, cuyo shauki guiándome en un sacrificio de my own holy vessel. Si como las mujeres en resistencia, I am willing to shed blood. I do. Monthly. Mi sacrificio, my own Chicana powers activating to give me health and guidance, to allow me to dance with the sun and the moon en un corrido lleno de pasión, con amor, paz y dignidad. Ya no más, lágrimas de sangre en la tierra de los Tongva. Oh, gracias.
It's called Sense, self-published.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I've struggled with 3 books all this past week. Activist Leaders a San José en sus propias voces, which includes people from the Depression generation and the baby boomers, both male and female. And then my baby, Las Hijas de Juan, Daughters Betrayed. And so the one that saw me go through the pain was Marta, my dear friend and my beloved amiga that I have known since she was 18 years old. And then I decided that I was not going to read from Rooted in Clay, Verónica Castillo y su arte, because that's going to have an opening in San Antonio, Texas on August 11th, and I'll give it its time then. So instead, what I did, in January of this year, another woman in my study joins the front cover. She died. And we shared a history in common. When I went to conduct the interview with her, she knew that I had written Las Hijas de Juan. And she's known as a person who's amazingly brave, brilliant, and who has a lot of moxie for challenging people. And so I thought, oh, caca. I'm gonna go meet with La Chingona. What is she gonna do? What is she gonna say? Well, to my surprise, V. Vasquez Robinson, who died B. Méndez, not related to me. That was her last husband. She got married 4 times. So she is one of the persons in this story. And I found out with the first interview, which lasted almost 3 hours, that she too was an incest survivor. As soon as she informed me of that, I told her, I can't record this. You didn't give me permission to hear the story. I'm gonna turn off the recorder, and I'd like for you to rip off the permission that you gave me to record your session today. And so she did, and I listened. So she also is the reason that this book took 20 years to get out, because she is central to the activist leaders of that community. And without her story, the story wouldn't have been complete. So when she read Las Hijas de Juan finally, she called me and she said, I give you full permission to tell my story in your book. I said, but I will never tell anybody what you shared with me. You asked me to keep it, and that's gonna stay with me. As an activist leader, V. Vasquez Robinson focused on bringing people together. She wanted to protect them from the social isolation of economically, racially, and sexually marginalized marginalized social position that she had occupied. These experiences framed her sense of fairness, equality, and justice, and were foundational in her struggle for women's rights in San Jose, California. V. Vasquez Robinson became an activist because she knew how it feels to be in the fringes. Because when you're a child, there's nothing you can do about that. That's just who you are. That's your place in life. So as an adult, it became important for me to bring people into the circle so that we could all have a better life. In her efforts to confront violence against women, the media coverage did not help her cause. She recalled that an article quoted me saying, "No woman deserves to be beaten." In response, comments from women and men of various ethnic and class backgrounds emerged with statements such as, "If she acts up, she's going to get kicked." According to B, sexism and gender issues complicated the ways in which domestic violence was understood. Even amongst ourselves, women of color at conferences readily cautioned each other to be careful because we don't want our brothers upset. She often retorted with, "I think you're wrong. You're wrong. They abuse women. It doesn't matter what color they are. You can't protect them hiding behind a color." As a Chicana activist leader, Vasquez Robinson took on many issues for the greater good of her community. However, the story for which she wants to be remembered is about a girl that had been kidnapped by her father. Going face to face with Betty Friedan or Bella Abzug was insignificant in comparison. In her honor, I retell that story in poetic form. B, this is for you. Soulful eagle eyes. Born with an artistic heart, she wrote poetry, short stories, and painted. Where others perceived limitations, she saw possibilities. You see the injuries in me? The accent gets more intense and my breathing becomes difficult. I just want you to notice. In face of the hardships, forever and a day be found the humor in life, nurturing joyful spirits in herself and others. An artistic, creative, and compassionate mujer, she was impacted by domestic violence, but she intuited the pain in others, unleashing her compassion. Be the super mujer woman who cared, found the means to help those in need. Soulful, eagle eyes, days and nights, she scanned the environment to help the needy. The wounds we carried were maps, guiding her to expose misogynist, classist, and racist monsters whose aim was to strip us of ourselves. Soulful, eagle eyes, day and night, she scanned the environment to help the needy. An activist leader who fought for human rights, she waged war on domestic violence, founding WOMA, the Women's Alliance, where a single working mother sought her out because only B can bring my child home. Willingly and graciously, she took on the task, disguised in red wigs and Jackie O glasses. Mentor and client dodged bullets, finding the father who led them to the child. With her bilingual silver tongue, we challenged mordidas, tradiciones, contested macho lamen, called for the arrest of the criminal. After placing her life on the line, they brought the child home. Soulful eagle eyes, day and night, she scanned the environment to help the needy. January 13th, 2023. Rest in peace. Happy heavenly birthday, March 10th. Thank you. Was that 5 minutes?
I think so.
Do you think it was 5 minutes?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, can I ask permission for just one little thing of hijas?
Sure.
Okay. Jose Alfredo Jimenez's song blared on the radio during our visit to the Marqueses, our relatives in Watsonville. I cried when I heard that song. My father was the song. With money and without money, I do what I damn well please, and my word is the law. I have no throne and no queen, and no one to understand me, pero sigo siendo el rey. A little intervention for you when you hear that song. Thank you very mucho. Thank you.
I'm gonna read from my book, Knitting the Fog. I wanna read you about this woman here. This is my great aunt, and a lot of people ask me, is she in the book? Is she part of the project? She's part of the project here. She was one of the, she was one of the 3 matriarchs in my family. She passed away 2 years ago, and I wanna honor her legacy by reading a short vignette from my book called Tia Zoila. I remember Tia Zoila being dark and thin. I can still picture her hiding a pack of cigarettes in one of her hollow apron pockets. Her hair was white. I have this image of her in my head. She's resting on a rock by the river. Piles and piles of people's dirty clothes sit in front of her while she calmly combs her long, straight, raven black hair, parted down the middle. Now, it looks like soft snow melting on her shoulders. When I was little, living in Mayuelas, I remember Tia Zoila rocking the tamarindo trees to sell the fruit in the mercado. She was thin, but strong. She never married. At a young age, she birthed 2 sons by different fathers. She raised both of them by herself. Danilo and Osvaldo live in the US now. I once heard Mama say that Tia Zoila went through menopause in her early 30s. She has always been alone ever since I can remember, but she has never complained or been afraid. Tia Zoila is a vibrant, special being. She also used to be a xolca. She had lost most of her teeth due to gum disease at the age of 25. The few teeth she had left bothered her to the point where she yanked them out by herself, one by one. Her toothlessness never stopped her from smiling or talking to anyone who crossed her path. She was a xolca until her late 40s when Osvaldo, her eldest son, bought her a set of brand new teeth. She refused to wear her dentures for the first couple of years until she finally gave in. Got used to them, I suppose. I remember how she would struggle chewing meat. She'd take forever to swallow. I remember asking her when I was 8, Tia Zoila, would you like me to chew the food for you so that you can swallow it more easily? Everyone at the dinner table almost choked laughing. She laughed uncontrollably, her thin body shaking. Tia Zoila was a proud woman, regardless of her missing teeth. She walked on the arid streets of Mayuelas triumphantly, with an erect, thin back, and the sweetest smile the size of a plantain. She had always been thin like a toothpick, smoked 3 to 5 cigarettes a day, drank gallo beer with her meals, played poker with her male friends, and sold números, the Pueblo's weekly lottery. Even though Tia Zoila was illiterate, she was self-sufficient. She sold lottery tickets on the street. She taught herself how to read and write numbers 1 to 100. She memorized these numbers, the way they looked, the way they sounded. Every Sunday night, she listened to a radio station that announced the winning number for the week. She prayed that no one had bought the winning number so she could keep all profits. Sometimes she had to borrow money from the neighbors and friends to pay the winner when she didn't sell all 100 numbers, or when her sons forgot to send her money from the US. Before learning how to sign her name with a pen, Tia Zoila signed with her left thumb. In time, she learned how to print the 5 letters of her name, S-O-I-L-A. When I enunciate her name slowly, it sounds like soy la, I am the. Or sometimes if I say it too fast, it sounds like sola, alone. Once again, I want to express my gratitude for being here tonight, surrounded by this gathering of talented artists, powerful women. Today's Revolutionary Women of Color project is a powerful platform that showcases women's voices, art, and photographs. Its goal is to show the world the amazing women who have the potential to transform communities and inspire young women to become leaders of tomorrow. It doesn't matter who you are or where you come from. This project aims to educate and motivate young minds to become positive role models for others. Women, Mujeres y Shock Revolutionary Vision serves as a reminder that every woman has a story of strength and resilience, and each one has the potential to be a revolutionary in her own unique way. Don't forget to visit today's revolutionarywomenofcolor.com and to buy the book. We're going to have a Q&A now for 10 minutes. If you have any questions, we'll be sitting here answering them.
Is there any way to get those slides turned up so we can see people in the audience?
Can we turn on all the lights? Regular lights.
Oh, thank you.
So now we can see you. Any questions?
Thank you.
Yes.
My question is for Felicia. Is your book here?
I have it. I didn't. You have some. I have some, so I can do whatever it needs to be done with Beyond Birth. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Your book here.
Oh, you're talking
Yeah,
to me?
yeah.
I can't see you with my glasses. I'm sorry. I didn't know you were making eye contact with me.
Claudia?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, my books are there too.
Leading the Fog?
Needing the Fog. That's where I read from, and then the women's book, which is Women, Mujeres y Shock Revolutionary Vision. It has all these photographs inside and the stories of resilience. So. Yes, Martha?
You said self-published. What does that mean?
It means that I put it together on online like 10 years ago. And it just when I would, I've always done like performance poetry and go to places, usually fundraisers and causes, and like to Arizona, far where we would have to go. So it was just something that I could hit the gaps and other stuff with. But I'm looking otherwise.
My name is Vicky. Thank you for sharing, for everybody that's here. And I was just so surprised to see Las Hijas de Juan. When I saw the cover, I was like, because a friend of mine had given me that book before I started grad school. And she's a writer too. I wish I would have told her to come today. And I really appreciate you writing that book. When I first read it, I had just finished my undergrad, and I ended up becoming a therapist. And I think part of it was the work that I was doing then, reading that book. So I really appreciate your words.
There was another question here. Somebody had their hand up?
No. I did. And I didn't know how to state my question. I listened to all of you, and I hear and feel the pain, and I don't know how you go through the process of writing it and then presenting it. It just so revealing that I can't even understand how you do this.
Well, if you're looking at me,
Yeah.
you've lived it with me. Okay, you lived it with me because you saw me go through the anxiety, you saw me look at it. I don't doubt my work. I think my work comes from the heart, and my work is for the greater good. You know, although that's not what people have said. Okay. I'm a feminist, men-hating woman who wants to malign men is basically how some perceive me. And
That's
so,
the opposite of who you are.
No. And so the thing about it is that you saw what I went through. You know, my body changes, I become anxious, my throat has issues, and I begin to cough. My first language becomes secondary, or it attacks my English and speaks with accent, you know. So all that stuff happens, and my body is going through changes every time I read. But it has to be done. You know, El Cucuy, that's what we called my father. We called him El Cucuy, we called him El Monstruo, except father. And we didn't call him, I said Juan, I called him Juan. And the rest of the people would not name him, the people in my family, my sisters and brothers. He died October 6th, and I forgot what year. But that was the year that he was released from prison after serving 3 years. And he was released early for good behavior. So there's a lot of things that I carry that I've written about, and it's like the other book that's coming up somewhere along the line so that I can answer some of the questions that you're asking. Thank you for that. And you saw me go through the process. So you know how it is, and you know how I feel, and you know how I act. And I'm not insecure about being the person that I am, but I get little when I have to do this.
I want to add to that. I remember, because when I wrote my memoir, which it's from me being a child up to the age of 13, I wrote a lot about family secrets and stuff. And when it first came out, I was terrified. I didn't want to go to readings. I was so scared to do it. But eventually I got used to it. And when the book got translated in Guatemala, my grandmother read it. Well, somebody read it to her, and she said, this book is banned here. It's not going to sell here. And I was okay with that. I'm totally okay with it. But here, my family, they have read it, and they're okay with it. But it's a way of dealing with trauma. It's a way of healing. So we have to do it. We have to do what it takes.
I think that our generation, and there's a generational difference here, and I think that some of the issues that I think that, and they still exist, I'm not saying that they went away, but I think that your generation, Felicia's generation, are a little more outspoken about some of the, I want to say sexual attacks or the challenges. Yeah, like I think that your generation has a little better handle.
What if you could do SEO smarter and fast?
My generation and my grandmother's generation, I mean, she was forced to marry the man that raped her. because he had taken her virginity and she no longer had value. And I mean, it's not that far from what we see happening in places like Pakistan and in the Middle East in terms of child brides and things like that. And I think we've evolved quite a bit when you consider the work of Josie. And I kind of feel like we're both writing about the same thing. I mean, when you're asking about the kidnapping and all these other things, I think that it takes a certain awakening, and it's scary. It's just really friggin' scary. You know, women who have daughters that get incested, the daughter is groomed. In many cases, she's groomed for that. And by the time the daughter is compromised and being attacked or being molested, what happens is if she goes to her mother and says, he's doing this to me, well, she is in no position. The mother is no longer in any position to protect the child or to protect the daughter, because he has worked to disconnect the relationship between the mother and the daughter. The mother's always crazy or sick, or, I love you more and you get me better than your mom, and stuff like that. So that by the time a situation arises, the mother also is financially dependent upon the father to maintain the family, and it compromises the entire family. And that's why it's very difficult for mothers of incested children to move forward, because they have no place to go unless they go to the street. And there's a book also by James Baldwin who I found completely enlightening. It's called Things Unspoken. And for me, it was like an epiphany reading that book. I understood so much more about it. But it's something that is happening within the community that needs to be addressed.
Do you have a question, Sachi?
Yeah, something I find so inspiring is that you mentioned this, the intergenerational conversation, and that so I was just curious to what you all see in the value of speaking to older generations, younger generations, and how we can continue having those conversations.
I recently attended a Mujeres Activas en Letras y Cambio Social conference at UC Davis, and I actually sat in a panel, and we talked about trauma. And I would say that probably 3/4 of the young women there had been sexually incested. And I'm not talking molested, because that's a different concept altogether. And there were tears coming out of every orifice that they had, because it was so painful for them. And what was most painful was that they didn't talk about it, that the mothers didn't see it or understand it or believe it. Again, we're talking about the reproduction of heteropatriarchy and who has the power and the right to decide what happens to the girls in the family. And it hasn't changed much. I'm sorry to say to you, Margaret, it hasn't changed much. It's still happening. And more often than not, it has to do with the inability, and I'm just saying economic inability, of the mothers to leave the environment or figure out a way to get out of the situation so they can protect their children. And the children want to keep the family together because they don't want to be responsible for breaking it apart. So all of those myths there of what happens in a family, what's private, what you talk about, who has a right, and maybe even in some cases believing that that child is chattel property of the patriarch. Therefore, he can do with that child whatever he or she wants. And if he's controlling the female parent, that's going to happen without much else to be done. My mother's 93 years old, and she's got renal disease, and all of the daughters, guess what? Not one of my brothers are caregiving for her, and we have to do 24/7 care for her, and we're rotating responsibilities. She's talked a lot, and she has opened up, and she said, nobody believes that I didn't see it. I didn't have the ability to understand evil, she said. I didn't think your father was capable of anything like that. So rather than try to understand that he may be, I covered it because I didn't want to know. And I didn't want people to believe that I would be with such a monster for all the years that I was. Just one of the little tidbit conversations we've had.
So, and look, you know, we talked about my kidnapping, my daughter, which I did do. The reason I kidnapped her is because I suspected that was what was happening, and I was trying to protect her. So that's the reason I don't talk about it much now, is because that was her life and her decision to talk about it or not talk about it. It's not something I want to spend too much time with. But if you do act as a mother to protect your children, watch out, because you're going to get attacked for it. And that's what happened to me. I mean, I went to prison for like a couple weeks, but still, they arrested me, they threw me in jail, they took my kid from me and dragged me from Chicago, and yeah, so it's not an easy path.
I have a question.
Yes.
So Margaret is a prolific painter, mainly known for her portraiture, and I'm wondering, these stories are so deep and so they are so revealing. How and where do you find that these stories of your life find their way to the canvas, or do they?
You know, when I sit and I paint someone's portrait, it's the same as writing someone's portrait, I think, because you're having a conversation and you're revealing yourselves. It's, you know, social intercourse, so to speak, right? And the things that you love, the things that you embrace, the things that you like about the people that you paint, are things that you hopefully embrace within yourself, and you reflect them. You paint yourself in the portraits of other people. So it's having those conversations with other people. If you paint, you know, instead of having an icon, I like using the actual portrait of people that exist within my community, because I get tired of just seeing icons and feeling like we're a cliche. You know, it just, you become a cliche if you don't. It needs to be authentic, and it needs to be real and here and now. You know, Chicanos are filmmakers, teachers, singers, dancers, intellectuals, poets, publishers. They are all those things. And if you see it in real life, then it isn't just about iconography, it's about the human being in your life.
One last question, Marta.
In your poetry, you speak a lot about the Chicana or Chola experience. Did you live it, or you just watched it and that's how you learned it? Where does your poetry, part of it, come from? I don't know your first. Leticia? Felicia. Okay.
I've been in LA and East LA since I was 2. I have never been in a gang, but I grew up, I feel like if you live in any area of like community of brown and black and in Los Angeles, South Central or East LA, you grow up in the hood and knowing what to do or not to do, share or not to share, speak, and like street smart, street slang, and so I would say that, and growing up, right, the music, communities, and the friends all around me. I was the only, person, all friends having children at like 15, 16, 18, right after, college, right after. So a lot of the things that are happening in our communities directly affecting all of us, right, in many spaces. And I wanted to speak to the intergenerational because I think it's really, really key, who's on this panel today, you thinking of that, the wall and the images within the book. There's so many stories, and myself, our generation would not be here without the work, literally the blood, sweat, tears, sacrifices, even lives that have been given in many war-torn communities, right? Your nation, your homeland, and many of our spaces, who literally pushed open the doors, spoke out, said these things, wrote poetry, or shared these, these had events like the Latina Writers Conference, these types of things to be open up those doors and, slam it and made everything that you can so that my generation and then those beyond, and Mujeres de Maíz as a result of that was because Linda, Xochimilco, all these different people before us, and self-help, these centers were pushing open the spaces, right, and doing it for us. And then I think myself, specifically and Mujeres de Maíz, really always honor that, those who came before, and we're still trying to make the lane for the others that come after us. That's been something since our very first event in 1997, or second event, where we brought up veteranas of the community and honored them in ceremony in that way. And pretty much every event that we've done like that, like a big one, we make sure to bring them and honor and say something. And then the whole reason we have Mujeres de Maíz, or the zines, is for new people to begin to publish in the zine or show their artwork for the very first time. And then decades later or years later, some of them are, have 3 books, not necessarily because of Mujeres de Maíz, but or like, touring their shows, have albums now, or things like that. So it's that generational circle right now. We're not necessarily in a circle right now, but we're having círculo. And, we were at the same conference, and we just thought we had seen each other in passing in the workshops and spaces, and we have that intergenerational conocimiento and love for each other. I've seen Margaret, since I was at Self-Help at 15 years old, as a volunteer all summer, and I would see all of these generations, community members, Deborah and others, doing their work. And so it's an important mention, to speak about that intergenerational and to continue to do the work. So it's such a conference like the marathon conference and that y'all are doing is, tiring perhaps for you all, but it's also such energy, right, and life-giving. So thank you for organizing and knowing the importance of it. There's going to be at least that one, but there's probably going to be 100 or 1,000 more affected by it, So.
Thank you, everyone, for being here, for being present, and for listening to our stories of resilience. That's the aim of the project, Today's Revolutionary Women of Color, and the book that got published with all the stories of resilience and the portraits. Thank you so much for being here.
Don't leave me, please. I wouldn't be a good publisher, editor, if I didn't say, please look out for Conocimientos Press. It is about creating multiple knowledges from the groundwork, publishing books that would otherwise not be published. Coming up are 3 books by Claudia, and I'm really excited about the project. I have the first book that's examining from a personal level, called Antonio, a Mexican Boy's Story, about a boy that grew up near San Marcos, Texas, who was the first Mexican descent young man to be allowed to enter white education. That's coming up. It's in the final stages. And there's other books coming from my press. So please support the independent, small publishing houses. And I mean small because I'm funding it and I'm a retired professor.
Also, my catalog is basically sold out, but we're doing a reprint, and a new catalog is also coming out of Plaza de la Cultura y Arte. There is a little sign-up book out there, and all you have to do is leave your email, and we'll contact you when the book is out, if you're interested. Thank you.
Buy their books.
Enjoying myself.
Yes.
Okay, good.